welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
And today we're going to talk about Terminator 2, Judgment Day, directed by James Cameron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, and introducing Edward Furlong. And with Avatar 2, Way of Water coming out, we wanted to make sure we definitely talked about James Cameron and kind of talked about his career and what he's been able to accomplish. During our last episode, we had a guest on, Josh Bell from Awesome Movie Year, and he chose Fargo, a Coen Brothers movie. And we had a lot of fun talking with him about that. But if you want to check it out, go ahead and look for us. We're, I think it's episode 71. So we are getting close to that 100 episode milestone. So we'll keep plugging along. But let's go ahead and move forward. And let's talk about Terminator 2 and James Cameron. And but before we do it, let's watch the trailer.
Same make.
These were taken at the West Highland Police Station, 1984. You were there.
Same model.
These were taken today.
You have to let me see my son. He's in great danger.
New mission. Once, he was programmed to destroy the future.
You don't know what it's like to try to kill one of these things.
Now, his mission...
Get down.
...is to protect it.
Mom! Come with me if you want to live.
You're really real.
His loyalty is to a child.
Who sent you?
You did. 35 years from now.
And his enemy...
He's a Terminator like you, right?
Not like me.
...is the deadliest machine ever built.
Can it be destroyed?
Unknown.
This time, there are two. Terminator 2.
You just can't go around killing people.
Why?
If you thought you had seen it all, look again.
Stay down!
Go! Now!
We gotta stick together!
Arnold Schwarzenegger. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. This time, he's back. For good.
Trust me.
Okay, so Terminator 2, T2 Judgment Day, directed by James Cameron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong.
Robert Patrick.
Hey, by the way, I keep wanting to say Jason Patrick, so if I say Jason Patrick, Patrick.
Okay, I'll correct you. And then Joe Martin, I think, rounds out our main cast. Other than that, and then Earl Bowen plays Dr. Silverman. He just recently passed away, I think, last week.
I know that. It's too bad.
Yeah, so he's good at playing Dr. Silverman. Anyway,
and this was Edward Furlong's first movie, so we can discuss too. Yeah. But Darren, I chose this movie mainly because, I mean, it was big for both of us when we were younger, and it made an impact on me for sure. And now the reason why I was going to tell you this, the reason why I thought it was in 1992, because that's when I first saw it. I saw it with a group of friends. We were at this girl's house, and they put in Terminator 2. And I remember thinking when she said the world's going to end in 1997, I thought, oh, it's only 5 years from now. So that's why I thought, okay, 1992. But then you corrected me, it's 91, which you were right. It's 1991. So my experience was not in a theater. It was at someone's house at a party, and it blew me away. Like I was mesmerized by what I was seeing. The special effects I thought were groundbreaking, and I really liked the liquid metal look with the 1000 character, and it's James Cameron at his best. It's Arnold at his best, and I think Linda's Hamilton, she's good in that. I think everything kind of came together. There are some issues I had that we will talk about, but overall, it was a fun, exciting movie. It was interesting. I liked the first Terminator, but this one kind of just it took what it had from the first one and it just made it better. I know they originally wanted to have the T-1000 in the original script, but they just didn't have the the technology wasn't developed, it wasn't there yet, so they couldn't include this one, so they cut it and they put it in the second one. And when you watch it, it's basically the same movie. You're watching the same thing happen. The first half of the first Terminator is just, Schwarzenegger trying to find Sarah, and you're just kind of following Reese and the Terminator trying to find Sarah. And this one, you're watching the Terminator, the good one this time, and then the T-1000 trying to go after, John Connor. And so it's basically the same movie for the first half, or maybe for the whole thing. I don't know. We'll talk about that too. But I just remember really, really liking it. I thought it looked awesome. I loved the blue filter they had going on, how that blue tint, and like I say, the effects were awesome. And we'll get to my critiques about it, but overall, I loved it. And I want to say I really didn't watch it that much more. I would catch it here and there, but I never became a fanatic of it. But I remember really, really liking it.
Okay.
So what about yours?
Well, my experience, I saw this in the theater again. I've mentioned it multiple times. Like my mom would send me off to New York when I wasn't in school during the summertime, so I could spend time with my cousins and aunts, uncles, things like that. So I saw this with Keith, who I've talked about before, is like my cousin / brother, is kind of how I look at him. But I remember going to see this movie. He would take me to see everything. I remember we saw RoboCop. We saw it like twice in one day. So we went to go see everything together. And this was, again, like a tradition. We went to go see Terminator 2. It was the big movie of the summer. And I think this is the movie that solidified my idea of what a summer movie is, or why we go to summer movies. So obviously you had Jaws that created the summer blockbuster. You had but it was still kind of a fluke. People didn't really know. And then Star Wars came out 2 years later, and that solidified it. Okay, summertime is a big time for movies. We've got to start releasing things. So there are those two, obviously. Die Hard is a big summer movie in my memory. Batman, that we've talked about, is a big summer movie.
Independence Day was big.
Independence Day, right? But Terminator 2 was the one I remember going to see. It was this big event. Like you sat down and you watched it and you were just involved in a way that was, I don't know, it felt different from other movies. It felt like you were really a part of something and you were experiencing something new. I think the special effects have a lot to do with that. The storytelling, we'll talk about, is nothing like new, but it's still solid in the same way that Cameron, for all his faults and his foibles, he's still very strong at many, many things. And I think this is a movie that's like emblematic of that. But again, it's a movie that I think I saw multiple times that summer. It was just one that you wanted to go back and see again and again. The most successful R-rated movie, I think, of all time, adjusted for inflation even today.
Yeah, but see, that's it's R-rated because I remember it being PG-13 for some reason. I don't know why I thought that, but I remember telling my son, yeah, you can. It's not rated R. You can watch it.
Yeah.
So we put it on and it started swearing. He was like, "Oh, it's swearing." It's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't realize."
Well, I did show this to Tanner when he was 11 or 12. It's like a rite of passage movie. It's like, this is R-rated, but there's nothing too extreme. I really liked how they use the F word only in tense situations, except when they go see their friend in the desert. But so, and they all, like when their tempers are raised or when it's tense or frustrating, that's when they use it. So it's not like used excessively. And so I think that's kind of how it works. But I think the character's really strong. Like I said, the special effects are not overdone. I think the Transformers movies or a lot of the Marvel movies, like in 20 years, are going to be like, they're going to leave a bad taste in your mouth. But even 32 years, I think the special effects for T2 still stand up and work, and they're still astounding. And I think that's just because Cameron, it's like the shark in Jaws. It's like they wanted to use it more, but if they did, it would have lessened the effect of it. You know what I mean? So with the special effects here, the liquid metal, they were making it up as they went. They didn't have everything planned. I know the Abyss had like the pseudopod stuff that kind of led to this. But still, they're making stuff on the fly. It's kind of like George Lucas and Star Wars. And so they used it sparingly. And I think that has a great deal to do with why this movie still feels so timeless, even today.
Yeah, I like it best when movies use the special effects sparingly. I hate it when they overdo it. It just kind of bores me and I tune out. But when it's used, just when it's needed to tell the story and used so well, like they do in this one. I mean, it's used so well and it's so effective. That's when I think it really adds to the story instead of taking away from the story. So tell me about your experience with James Cameron. Like what was the first movie you saw of his? How did you get introduced to him?
Well, obviously, like we mentioned before, it's like Cameron, especially with the second Avatar out right now, he's such a big name and he's made such an impact. And I think when I look back at my favorite movies, I don't really think of like Avatar obviously breaks new ground for special effects, but I think of the storytelling, I think of the characters, and that's what really drew me in. The first movie that I did see was The Terminator. And it's weird because looking at it now, I have a different attitude of it. But when you're 10 and it's low budget and it's like a bullet, like it moves it's very strong, and it just narratively, it just very cohesive, and it moves straight and fast. But the way that it's shot, there's something about the movie I remember, especially the part where the T-800 or whatever has its eye shot out. And there's a part where Schwarzenegger, the dummy of Schwarzenegger, like operates on its eye and like rips its eye out and stuff like that. And I remember thinking that was like, I shouldn't be watching this. Like I equated it with those video nasties, you know what I mean? About like all the gore and stuff. Like looking at it now, it's different because it's a robot, right? So it's not like a human experimenting on itself. So when he exposes itself, but as a 10-year-old, that's kind of shocking. I know in this movie he removes his arm, but like it's different when it's like an eyeball and you're watching, like, I shouldn't be watching this. And so the thing that I really liked about that first Terminator is it feels like a horror movie, like it's a slasher movie, but it's like a sci-fi kind of bent. Was Terminator your first experience with James Cameron?
I want to say yes, but I didn't know he was director of it. I did see that one, and I remember thinking that it was kind of eerie. It was darker, and I remember liking it and being kind of creeped out by it. So when I discovered later when T2 came out that it was the same director, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But I mean, I do tend to like T2 better, mainly because I think they just improved upon everything they were going to do in the first one. They just kind of like enhanced it.
Well, we'll talk about how James Cameron is the sequels. I just think the weakness of T2 is that it's just a retread of the first one, which was a retread of like Harlan Ellison stories, like from Outer Limits and things. So they were even sued and had to amend their credits at the end. So Cameron isn't fully the most original director on the face of the planet, but I think just the way that if I was to compare him, I do prefer the first Terminator just because it was more of a shock to the system. But again, any criticism I have about T2, I don't want people to misunderstand. I think T2 is great. Like I said, it's one of the summer blockbusters, right? Even though I think Jaws and Star Wars are better movies, I think this is the summer blockbuster because it's like, this is the one that convinced me, and like that this is what you go to movies for. And then obviously, I think when Aliens, I didn't know who James Cameron was. Like it's not like Spielberg where I wanted to learn who this guy was. I just thought Terminator was a good movie when I was 10, right? And then Aliens comes out, and Aliens I think I also prefer Aliens like sequel-wise to T2 just because I think I like the character interactions, and I like the idea that it's a Vietnam kind of allegory. I like the idea that it's the Ripley character Sigourney Weaver, who gives such a strong performance in that movie, but it's about motherhood, right? So it's like where Alien is like this subtle horror masterpiece, like and all this the subtle sexual like subtext that goes on that makes you uncomfortable. There's nothing subtle about Aliens. Like James Cameron is not a subtle filmmaker, right? So the movie is very much about how Ripley becomes a mom to this new character. But again, that's strong. All the character dynamics are so strong in Aliens. And that's the movie where I was like, who's this guy that made this? Oh, he also made the Terminator. Oh, he's a good filmmaker. And then by the time The Abyss came out, and again, if I had to choose, I think The Abyss might be my favorite James Cameron movie. And it's not because it's a perfect movie, because it's not. Like you have the deep core stuff with the Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio characters, but then you have the alien stuff. And at the end of the movie, they don't really mesh. Like I don't know what they have to do with each other. Like it's not very clear, right?
Yeah.
But what I love about Aliens, if we're talking about James Cameron as like an unsubtle kind of not great writer, the way that I think he gave Orson Scott Card, like he had him, the author, like create a backstory for Bud and Lindsay in The Abyss. And then Orson Scott Card gave that to Cameron, who gave that to Harris and Mastrantonio and said, this is your backstory. And the dynamics between Harris and Mastrantonio, I know that is the movie where Cameron started to get this reputation as a hard ass director, like difficult to work with, because there's a lot of, like Ed Harris won't talk about the movie. Mastrantonio famously stormed off the set during her resuscitation scene.
Yeah, I heard about that.
But their interactions, they feel so real. As a couple, they feel so real. And that last half an hour is not so much action, it's about the emotions that they're going through. Like he thinks like Lindsay dies, but then she's resuscitated, or Bud dies, but then he comes back. And it's just their reactions of realizing what they've lost and how they haven't communicated how they feel about each other up to that point, and just the emotion that they go through. First of all, their acting, and I'm not okay with directors acting like dictators on set, like, and being like so like forceful and bullying their actors, right? But I do think that Harris and Mastrantonio give super strong performances in that movie. And so when I look at movies, I don't really look for perfection so much as a connection, or I want to have like authenticity, or I want to feel something. And The Abyss, more than anything else, makes me feel something. Like, I know James Cameron's all about spectacle, but that's the movie that's about human relationships, and he does so well, and it's just a perfect amalgamation. So with Aliens and The Abyss, what are your thoughts on those two movies?
Okay, well, I like Aliens. I thought that was a fun movie. Yeah, I want to say this though, which might surprise you, but The Abyss bores the crap out of me. I had the hardest time watching that movie.
Yeah.
And I can sit through it and I can appreciate what I'm looking at. And I agree with you. The acting is good. There is some good chemistry there. And at the very end, when you see the water snake, that's impressive. It's all good. But when it's done, I don't really leave feeling like anything different.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I don't feel inspired. I don't feel like I'm motivated to do anything. I want a movie to kind of inspire me and make me want to go out and be a better person or do something good with my life. I would walk out of that going, I don't care. It was they're in the water the whole time. You know, it's like it's super. So when I think of James Cameron, it's probably my least favorite movie he's done.
Yeah. And that's fine. Like, there's not, like, everybody's going to have different, and I absolutely understand like where you're coming from with that point of view. You know, like I said, it's not perfect.
I knew you would be the one to like that.
Yeah.
I'd be the one to not like that one. So
yeah, well, if you look at him, I think Terminator is a more perfect experience as a movie. I think Aliens is a more perfectly built, structured movie as a movie. It's those human relationships and the acting and the feel that you're actually, I know they created the rig, but you actually feel like you're in that rig. It doesn't feel plastic. It doesn't feel like processed. It feels like you're actually in there. So I love all that stuff, even though
I know they went through a lot. I did watch a documentary on the making of The Abyss. I know they went through a lot, and so I know what went into it, and I can appreciate all that. I know it was hard to do, but it's just boring.
Right.
It was probably an hour too long.
Yeah, I understand. So again, Terminator, we'll come back to that because obviously that's the meat of our conversation. But I think Terminator 2 might be the movie where people didn't have faith in Cameron. I know that the movie cost like $90 million, which is nothing today. Like, we're in a $500 million budget time, like for blockbusters.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Right? But Terminator 2 was a $90 million budget, and it was like so over budget, like about 20 million, that people thought this is going to be a disaster. And I think that's where his reputation of don't bet against James Cameron came from, because the movie, like, even though it cost 90 million, it made like 500 or 600 million. So it recouped its investment from like tie-ins even before it hit the screen. You know what I mean? So we'll come back to that. But I think when True Lies hit in '94, that was his next big one. It was just the next James Cameron movie. It's the next Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know what I mean? And so I think True Lies is interesting because it's like The Abyss. Like, the terrorist subplot doesn't really mesh with the Mr. and Mrs. Smith, like, husband-wife spy subplot. Like, there's a whole section where it stops with the terrorist stuff and focuses on the Jamie Lee Curtis character and their relationship for like an hour. And then all of a sudden, when the terrorists come back in, it's like, oh yeah, there's a whole other subplot. So you're like, you forget. So it doesn't mesh that well. And there's this weird, like, watching it again today, like these days, True Lies has this weird misogynistic kind of like obsession with phallic symbols. Like, they talk about penises a lot, or there's a part where the Art Malik character like straddles like the nuclear bomb, like it's a penis. So it's just got this weird like obsession with masculinity. And it like I said, it doesn't treat, today you watch it, it's a comedy, right? But it doesn't treat like women as well as you think. It doesn't treat like people of color very well. It doesn't, it's all, I don't know. But the thing with True Lies is that the action in True Lies is so mind-boggling. And obviously with Terminator 2, we'll talk about where Cameron's gift for action comes from. But going from there's a bathroom sequence that's so influential that Bad Boys ripped it off like a year later. A lot of the same beats. The scene where the Harrier jets are piloting like the Miami Bridge or whatever. Mission Impossible 3 kind of aped that sequence. And then the Harrier jet sequence against that building is just, I remember watching that in the theater and like having my mind blown. I'm like, this is the most awesome thing I've ever seen, because it's this giant Harrier jet on this, like, killing terrorists on the side of a building, and that's it. But it's so, I don't know, it's so fun, and there's such a fun attitude to those actors. It's like a James Bond kind of feel for it. Did you see True Lies in a theater?
I mean, I think so. I don't know. I can't remember, but I do like it. I enjoy the husband and wife stuff better than the action stuff in that movie. I mean, I still like the action, but I like the Jamie Lee Curtis bit.
Yeah.
You get a little break from all the action. It's kind of fun to kind of like relax and get into that part of the story. So I like
Right.
that.
Well, there's, we talk about the misogyny and stuff like that. When you ask Jamie Lee Curtis, like her ideas, what she says, it's a comedy, right? I mean, she kind of deflates that. So even though that's there, it's like, you're not supposed to take it seriously. But,
Yeah.
True Lies made so much money. Again, by this time, Cameron was like writing his own check. So when Titanic came around, I think Titanic, again, like never bet against James Cameron. That movie went so far over budget and people thought it was going to be a disaster. And then I think the first trailer hit and was like, it wowed everybody. I don't know. It's kind of a weird dichotomy with Avatar, because I still haven't seen Avatar. And I think it had to do with the, just it made so much money and became such a cultural staple that my wife and I were like, we missed the boat. Like we didn't see it opening weekend. Whereas Titanic, that had that same kind of, oversold, like everybody's talking about it, can't be that great kind of attitude. But I saw Titanic like first day. And so I missed all the hype. I was just going to see a movie about this famous ship that sank. And I think Titanic, it's the Gone with the Wind of our day. I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but the dialogue is very soap opera-ish, but it's kind of the point. It's like aping those old Hollywood not biopics, those whole Hollywood epics in that way. But when the shit hits the iceberg, I think it's a perfect movie because it shows off Cameron's like skill at building suspense and building stakes and showing characters like how they react to situations. And if we're talking about action, even though it's not, I wouldn't call Titanic an action movie, right? But the way that the way that it dawns on people what's happening, the way that people react, the way that earlier in the script they build in the idea that the ship is going to break, right? Which I think is a brilliant screenwriting technique because it tells you this is what's going to happen. So when it happens on screen, we don't go, why did the ship break in half? Like there's nothing, we knew what's going to happen because they told us the logistics of it. But just that whole hour and a half it functions the same as an action sequence. It's one long action sequence that's very sustained. We know where all the characters are. We know how what they're reacting to and what the stakes are. I just think that as spectacle, I think Titanic, especially that last hour and a half, is just a perfect like example of what you go to see movies for. I don't know. What did you think about Titanic?
Well, I've only seen it once all the way through. I've seen bits and pieces whenever it's on TV or whatever, but I saw it once all the way through at home, I think. I think I saw it at home. But I don't remember being like that impressed. Sure, I mean, I think it's good. I don't know what to say about it really, other than that, it's fine. I don't know. I just, since I'm not that interested in that story, maybe it's because of the characters. I don't know, but I do agree with you. There are some spectacular things to look at visually. It is well done at the end there. It's just for some reason, a lot of these movies that he makes, I just walk away going, what did that do for me? Like same thing happened with Avatar. We went and saw Avatar when it came out, and I was like, well, that was a waste of time.
Yeah,
it might have looked cool, but it was a waste of my time and money. I'm not gonna. So I haven't seen the second one yet. I don't plan on seeing the second one. I know there's 3, 4, and 5 like coming down the pipeline too. So it's like, what's the point of making these movies nobody wants to see? Like, sure, people are probably gonna go see them because it's James Cameron, but man, oh man, they're just not. They might be visually stunning, but they're not good. They're not good movies.
Do you think it has to do with the characters just aren't nabbing? I mean, what do you think the difference is between?
Well,
the
maybe all I know is
Titanic.
In the first Avatar, like I just did not have any kind of like connection with any of the characters at all when it started, and so they just didn't draw me in from the very beginning. So I had to sit through this whole thing not caring about what I was looking at.
And does the CG, is that kind of a drawback for you, like the CGI?
Oh, I mean, it's good, but there's just so much of it. It's just overwhelming, and so I just tune out. Like I was saying, I like it better when movies splice it in when it's needed, and which enhances the story instead of takes away from the story.
Instead of being the whole function. Like I said, like we haven't seen Avatar. I know people are kind of like, what? You haven't seen like at one time the most successful movie ever made? And it's like, well, the idea of the story just never really interested me. Like the idea of 3D, I like the idea that James Cameron made the first 3D movie that actually is made for 3D. Like it immerses you in a world, right? And Pandora. But since I missed it in the theater, it's like, well, what am I going to go see it for? Like, because I'm a story guy. We've talked about that before. Like, it's the story that I pay attention to. But even like, I've seen the last action sequence. I've seen maybe the last 20, 25 minutes. I don't know how. I think I just have a copy of it. I decided to put it on. The thing that I noticed about Avatar is it still has the same logistics and the same choreography and the same story weaknesses that all James Cameron movies have. I know the whole function of the movie is about something called unobtainium, which makes you laugh because it's like unobtainium, like how on the nose is that as a MacGuffin, right? But like he bases these very simple ideas, and then from that he builds these worlds and these characters and these action sequences that immerse you. So the ideas never bothered me, and watching the action in Avatar, even though it's like CGI, it still functions and still moves and still operates the same as a regular movie does. It's not like a cartoon, because the camera has dynamic movements and it's grounded from what I see, and the choreography is very clear. I don't know who these characters are, but even watching that last 25 minutes, I know what everybody's up against, what their concerns are, like where they are and like relation to each other. So I think all that still works as far as James Cameron being James Cameron.
Yeah, isn't that his thing, trying to raise the bar? So
yeah, that's what he does. That's so I guess from we're talking before we recorded, and I guess like we're doing 90s Palooza, right? And these are movies that we love. And so we're obviously going to talk about big movies. And T2 is one of those big movies. But it's one of those things like Star Wars or Jaws, where everybody's said everything that could possibly be said about. Yeah, right? But it's something that we do want to talk about. I think it's just interesting, especially with A Way of Water being out now. And again, don't bet against James Cameron. As we're talking, I think it's already crossed the $2 billion mark. So never count him out. Like, he's always going to engage audiences. He knows what he's doing, even though we might think his movies are silly, right? But I just thought it would be interesting talking about T2 from the lens of James Cameron's strengths and his weaknesses. Because I think if you look at any movie, this is the movie that has a lot of it. It has his strengths. It has his raising the bar. It has him as a dynamic filmmaker. It has the using those special effects sparingly, like we talked about. So that's kind of what I thought we could talk about Terminator 2, like through the lens of, you know what I mean? Kind of the perspective of how it talks about James Cameron as a filmmaker.
Yeah, as he was trying to just improve upon what he did the first time. I think maybe he didn't get to do what he wanted to do the around, and so he was trying to get everything in this one. Because like I said before, it's essentially the same story. It's just basically the same movie. Yeah. It's just I think the T2 is cleaner and it has the better special effects because the technology was there finally. So he was able to do those things he wanted to do, and so he had gotten better with action. And the diesel chase and the fight between the two Terminators at the end with all that stuff. It's all there and it's all really good. It's really well choreographed and really well done. But I think he just got to do what he wanted to do the first time. They didn't get to do it the first time.
Yeah, I think the first Terminator is very story oriented, and so like I said, it moves like a bullet. Like it's determined to tell a story from beginning to end. I think this one is kind of, it embellishes the characters a little bit. There's a little more meaning and all that. I don't characterize the first Terminator as an action movie at all, even though there's action in it. There's a scene where Reese is fighting the Terminator in the bar or whatever, or there's the car chase, or there's the they're out trying to outrun the semi truck at the end, that kind of thing. But I don't categorize it as an action movie. This I would categorize as an action movie because the action sequences are what kind of wow you. There are moments, and I was telling you before we recorded, out of all the movies that we've watched for NostalgiaCast, this was the one movie that I didn't have to watch because I've seen this movie so many times. I've got it all memorized. I've got every story beat, every acting choice, every film flub. I've got all that ingrained up here, so I didn't have to watch it. But again, it's a fun watch. It's just interesting through the lens of this is James Cameron to a T, and it fits all his faults and foibles and strengths, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the acting real quick. What do you think about Schwarzenegger? Do you think this is his defining role?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Schwarzenegger is he's limited as an actor. We're not beating around the bush when we say that, right? There's only so much that Schwarzenegger can do. He's not like Daniel Day-Lewis, right? But the thing with Schwarzenegger is he's aware of it. Like, he doesn't think he's a great actor. And when he chooses movies, especially during that 80s and 90s run when he was the strongest, he would choose movies specifically to suit his talent and what he was able to do. And I think playing a robot suits him. Playing Commando obviously suits him. Kindergarten Cop suits him, like twins suits him. It's all built around what he can do. Does that make sense? So I don't think that Schwarzenegger is the greatest actor, but
that was his goal, to be a
Yeah.
worldwide bodybuilding champion, and then to become a movie star. I'm not sure if Governor was on his list of things to do,
Right.
but he promised that too. You know what I mean? So he didn't really set to become a great actor. He just wanted a movie star.
yeah, I think it also has to do with the director. Like James Cameron, like knows how to use Schwarzenegger. So Schwarzenegger can be funny, he can be serious, he can be awesome, he can look like John says, he can be dorky, right? But then you have like Joel Schumacher directing him in Batman and Robin, and you're just letting Schwarzenegger go. Like your Schwarzenegger do what you want. It's like, no, you don't let Schwarzenegger do what he wants. Like, because it's not always so funny. You know what I mean? You've got to kind of rein that in.
Yeah.
I think James Cameron, out of anybody, I think James Cameron is the best director of Schwarzenegger. And like I said, Schwarzenegger is able, he threads that needle of being like a joke and being a super serious, awesome action hero in this. You know what I mean? And so I think he works.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing like particularly nuanced about it. He does pull off like becoming more human as the movie goes. So it works.
Yeah. And I like that. I like that whole father-son relationship thing going on with John Connor, Edward Furlong's character. I think that adds to the story, and I think it does give Schwarzenegger a little bit more room to play as far as acting. Linda Hamilton, do you like her? Which one? I mean, let me say this first. When I first saw Terminator, I was unimpressed with the Linda Hamilton, Sarah Connor character. She was just forgettable in the first one for some reason. I didn't really care about her. And the second one has a more developed character. She's got something to play with as far as like trying to save the world and make sure her son becomes the leader of the world, to save everybody from machines. But I think she's good in it. But sometimes I think it's too much, because I just think like, okay, she was told to be super, super angry at the scene. So she was super, super angry. And so you see it and you go, okay, well, where's the emotion behind it? I want to see the emotion while you're screaming at this guy, not just see you scream at him.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's my critique with her. Even though I like her more in this one, I still think she was just almost over the top.
Yeah, that could be limitations as an actress, right? Same as with Schwarzenegger. What I do like is the first Terminator, she definitely has an arc. Like she's this dowdy kind of waitress who needs to be saved from everything. And she doesn't want to I don't want to be a part of this, and by the end, she doesn't become a full-on action hero, but she becomes capable, right? She's a different person at the end of the movie than she was at the beginning. So there's definitely an arc. And with this one, when they were talking about doing the sequel, like she was interested, but she's like, but if we're going to do this, I want to add some more stuff. And so it was her idea, I believe, to make her crazy and kind of make her kind of disillusioned, because again, once you're told that the world is going to end and your son is going to be the leader of the resistance, like the few humans that survive, it's kind of going to mess with your brain a little bit and make you paranoid. And especially like all the people that she was involved with, like being incarcerated, being separated from her son, like that's all she had to focus on, was trying to get out and trying to save her son so they could do.
I get that. I get that. I just feel like there wasn't that emotion behind it, even though she tried really hard to bring that emotion. You know what I'm saying?
Well, there's the scene, when she goes to kill Dyson and she realizes that she can't do it, right? And so she backs off. And so there's the scene where, and I think that might have to do a lot with Cameron not being great at doing human emotions a lot of the time, especially if you have actors that aren't quite prepared for it. I do like the idea, and they do sell it, like Schwarzenegger and Hamilton sell it, of she's more of a Terminator than he is, right? You're talking about the cold blue like filter. It's very machine-like, and the first half of the movie, that's what it is. Like Terminator's unfeeling, the T-800 is unfeeling, Sarah is unfeeling, like John is the only one that's trying to break through to these two people that are so important to him.
Yeah, I can see that.
But I love the idea that she's a better Terminator than he is, and he's a better parent than she is, because he's totally focused on John when they're around, because that's what he's ordered to do, right? That's his whole mission. He's not sidetracked by anything else. His whole point for existence is John. And I like how toward the end of the movie, they both become human. It gives you, something to root for instead of this robot and this machine-like woman. So I like that they're given arcs. I like we talked about, I don't know 100% if the actors pull that off. And I think there's one actor out of these, maybe two actors out of these five that are stronger than Schwarzenegger or Hamilton. You know what I mean? So I don't know if they sell it, but they're definitely, they sell it 100%, but they definitely sell it, if that makes sense.
Okay, so is Edward Furlong one of those?
No. Well, here's the thing with like kid actors, like Haley Joel Osment obviously hit big, but then again, I think I mentioned my friend Brian was like, well, any performance is going to be powerful when you whisper all your dialogue, right? So Haley Joel Osment made an impact in there. If you're looking at another Schwarzenegger movie, I think Austin O'Brien, I might get kicked for this, but the kid in that movie is just so overbearing and he mugs for the camera. And it's like, dude, I can't tell if you're a good actor at all because you're mugging. I think Edward Furlong is fine. He's not annoying. He sells all the parts, but I don't know if because I know they found him at like a boys club, like they were casting for him and they found him for it and he wanted to have this intelligence. And it's there. And you do see in the writing that he's a born leader, right? But I don't know if he sells every little bit of dialogue. He's not annoying. That's the main thing that I like is he's never annoying. He's never to the point where just shut up. Like you're trying too hard. I just think he's not quite there. American History X is probably a better performance from Furlong.
Yes, I would agree with that. I was going to say that's probably the one I like him the best in is that movie.
Yeah. So like I said, he's not the greatest, but he's not bad. He's fine. He does what he needs to do.
Yeah, and he made a hairstyle popular. So
I think the story is that Cameron even had to cut his hair. Like he kept chewing on his hair. It was so long, so he had to cut it. But yeah, so Furlong's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So which actor is the one that you think is the best, gives the best performance?
Well, I think out of all the actors, I think Joe Morton sells the humanness. Like he's the warmest of all the characters. He doesn't have anything to prove. That's the thing, right? He's just the guy that creates this thing that he thinks is going to make him rich and famous, but it turns out that it's going to destroy the world. And he's crushed by that because this is his whole life, right? And I think Joe Morton, I think when in interviews, he said an interesting thing. He said that I think James Cameron cast me because he wanted somebody, a POC, to be a person of color, to be the catalyst to change the world. And I thought that was great. That's a great idea, right? And it's interesting too, because, they filmed certain scenes, I think on the same street that the Rodney King riots happened. And so there's an interesting thing that goes on because the cops and the SWAT members in this, there's a part where they come in and they just start shooting, right? And they basically kill the Dyson character. They shoot him without any warning. Where before that, like when you see Schwarzenegger with the Gatling gun, like they tell him, like, put the gun down or we're going to start firing, right? But after that, the SWAT team runs in and they shoot without questioning. And it's interesting they do that to a black man. I thought it's just very kind of like topical in a way, especially with the cop stuff. But I just think that Morton is so warm and human, but he doesn't have anything to prove. And he sells every bit of his dialogue. He sells himself as a family man. He sells all the stuff where he's crushed. I think he gives a very solid, I don't have any qualms with this performance at all, but we don't have any preconceived notions of him, right? He doesn't have anything to prove.
Well, I do agree with you. I think his performance is really well done. And I think I tend to feel really, really bad for him when he gets shot the first time. And you can feel the pain that he's feeling. Really feel it. Like you can just sense that he's in a lot of pain right now. Right. And so he makes that believable. And then his death scene is also really, really well done. When he's like trying to get that last breath in, and then he drops the grenade or whatever, the what do you call it, switch, and everything blows up. But those moments are really, really well done. And it's, so good job for Joe Morton.
Right. And then the last actor, obviously, I don't think Robert Patrick, like I like Robert Patrick a lot. I don't think he's the most, like I said, the most diverse actor, but the way that this character, the way that the T-1000 is written, the way that Patrick plays him, I think he was probably, after Darth Vader, he was the most terrifying screen villain I'd ever seen. And I think that has to do with the fact that he's emotionless. I think Cameron described it. If you're looking at the Terminators, it's an interesting dichotomy because the T-800 is like a Panzer tank and the T-1000 is like a Porsche. He's just very sleek and unassuming, right? And I like that dynamic of this big hulking robot that's bested at every turn by this skinny, like kind of spelt like he looks like a biker, like a bicyclist, right? Like a professional biker, right? And so, but the way that, and you can see it because when the Dan or Don Stanton, the twins, when they're playing the T-1000, when the Jeanette Goldstein, the old Cameron stalwart, when she's playing the T-1000, they go overboard with selling themselves as a robot. Like you see the part where the guard is like walking past and he's like, it's like, oh, you're obviously a robot, right? I think the whole point of having Robert Patrick as a T-1000 is he's so human that you think he's the hero, because the visual language is telling you at the beginning, but then he's like a shark. You know what I mean? He's like so focused. He's got no emotion. Like this is just what he does. There's no stopping him. There's no reason, even more than Michael Biehn like talking about the Terminator not being able to reason with the first one, I think that Robert Patrick makes an even bigger and better case for it in this one, because he's so focused and he's got one goal and he's terrifying.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
he almost accomplishes that goal pretty quickly too.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of like, whoa, he almost did it. But I agree with you. I think he's really good, as a Terminator. I think he gave this movie credit for his career. Like if it wasn't for this role, he wouldn't have a career. So
yeah. I know when he started he took over for Duchovny in the X-Files for a little bit. And there's a part where an episode where they're literally trying to find a metal man. And he comments on, "I'm metal man, like, give me a break." I thought that was funny, but it's just like, yeah.
I do like in this movie when he was in the department store and looks over at that mannequin and kind of gives it a like,
yeah, before we know what he's supposed to look like.
Right. That was kind of cool.
And that's another, if we, after the performances, like if we're going to talk about it, like what were you said that the movie blew you away. And I mentioned briefly, like there are a handful or maybe at least a dozen sequences in this movie where for seeing it for the first time in a theater, I was like, holy crap, like my mind couldn't process it.
Oh yeah, like the coming out of the floor, out of the tiles, and then going into the helicopter as the liquid metal turning into the human form after that, and then also going through the bars in the prison.
Yeah.
Those things were like, what the heck? How'd they do that? It was
yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. Like I love I say that Cameron's not a subtle filmmaker, but the part that you mentioned when they're in the department store and he looks at like the metal like mannequin, that's a very like that's telling you what the T-1000 actually is. Mm-hmm. And so here's the thing, like Cameron is interesting because like when he does sequels, he tends to do just a retread of the sequels, right? Like it's just like even Piranha 2, it's just like it has some of the same story beats, like the piranhas or the creatures turn out to be like an experiment gone awry. There's a part of them where they have to destroy like either a smelting plant or a boat to destroy the piranhas. And so there's a lot of the same beats. Aliens has some of the same beats, especially at the end when you think it's all over. But oh no, the alien queen is still alive and she rips Bishop in half. And then there's this one, which I thought was interesting because it's doing it on purpose, right? It's like we talked about with the visual language. The movie is making you think that the T-800, even though subtly it doesn't, because that scene in the biker bar is kind of humorous in a way that it disarms you, right? Even though this is a killer. But then you see the T-1000 and he acts human. Like he goes to see the foster parents, Todd and Janelle, right? And he's human. And there's a visual language to the movie that's telling you the T-1000, Robert Patrick, is the Michael Biehn character. He's the savior, right? Schwarzenegger, the T-800, he's the bad guy. And it's telling you all that. And the thing that's great about Cameron as a writer is he doesn't oversell that stuff. Like like you said, the whole first half hour, you're wondering what these people are doing. You're wondering what the dynamics are, what the goals are going to be. And then it slowly becomes clear. And if we're talking about the mind-bending stuff, I love, and I've always loved this, the Brad Fiedel score, how the Terminator has a theme. It's got like a metal heartbeat. And then the T-1000 has this kind of sinister, kind of slithery kind of theme, right?
Yeah.
And the part where Schwarzenegger and when the T-800 and the T-1000 meet, the themes like overlay each other. And I thought that was such a brilliant sonic choice. Awesome. You know what I mean? To the point where Schwarzenegger points his shotgun and you think, we know where this is going. But then he goes, "Get down." And you realize what's happening. And that's what's funny, because the main drawback of the movie is how cool of a reveal would that have been if the whole marketing scheme of the movie didn't tell you that Schwarzenegger was a good guy from the beginning, right? Imagine if you had no idea that Schwarzenegger was playing the good guy. How well would that moment have played? How mind-blowing would that moment have been where he says, "Get down"? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you also think he's talking to the other guy too, even though they're both in the hallway. So anyway.
Right. But when he shoots the T-1000 and you see the metal like craters, and when he has the multiple craters or whatever, and when the T-800 goes and stands over him, and you see the stuff melt into his body, and that was the first time I was like, what am I watching? Like you've never seen that before.
However, watching it now, though, the scenes don't really match. When you watch it now, it doesn't really match as far as the way it's lit and everything. You can tell it's special effects. So,
a little bit smoky.
Back then, it was like, wow, that was cool. But like now, you're like, okay, I can see that. That's really matter.
You can see the seams, but still, I think it still sells it really strong. And then obviously, So we keep going with the mind-boggling moments, like when Schwarzenegger's chasing after them in on his bike, and he does the thing with the shotgun where he cocks it by twirling it in his hand. I remember the theater going, "Whoa, that's the most awesome thing I've ever seen."
Yeah,
And when they blow up the truck and you see the T-1000 walk out of the flames again, your brain can't process it because you
well,
just
when you
had
see all the
seen that.
little metal pieces kind of mold back together and form back into the T-1000,
Yeah.
like, oh man.
Yeah,
And
it continues into the hospital where like you see him like meld through the bars. You're like, how did they do that? The part where he rips open the doors or whatever, and Schwarzenegger points the shotgun and blows his head apart. And like you're like, what? Like literally in the theater, you're like, what is this? Like, it's so well done, and it's just so shocking because you've never seen stuff and to that effect before, even though you can still kind of see the seams. When I watched it again last night, it was still like these still have impact because I don't know, they're timing it perfectly. They're dispersing these moments at perfect times where it has the most impact. It's not like, again, the latest Ant-Man just had its latest trailer, and that whole thing is special effects to the point where you notice that it's special effects, right?
Yeah.
I think T2 is a mix of physical effects and CG effects and model effects, and it's just like Jurassic Park we talked about in an episode before. It's a perfect melding of all those things to sell.
It's a good balance of the two.
Yeah, when you see the T-1000 drip through the elevator ceiling and you see the reflection of the elevator beneath it, when it shoots through the helicopter and he melds and he turns and you can see the reflection of the other pilot.
Right.
It's that attention to detail that really sells it. And what I love, if you look at like the Transformers movies, I think the count is there's at least 2,000 special effects shots in the Transformers. 2,000. And when you look at this, I think the number of CG shots is anywhere from 45 to 46 shots of CGI. And then special effects shots go anywhere from 150 to 300. The number kind of changes. But how much of an impact of that where Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 can have these minimal effect shots and they still last 30 years later, where Transformers or Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania are not going to last past 10 years.
Yeah.
You know what
Honestly,
I mean?
I can't even watch the Transformers anymore. I can't even sit through them. It's just too much.
Right. And so we have all these mind-blowing moments. What do you think of what's your opinion? I know you said you like the action in this, but what is your opinion of the action? Like, how does the action work for you?
I think it's good. Let's see, specifics, or I mean, my favorite thing is when the diesel jumps off the bridge and chases them the other way on the motorcycle. That's probably my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah.
Or when he's chasing after the car and he kind of like, his arms turn those metal spikes and he's kind of like climbing onto the cop car or whatever it is. Those are really good moments for me. I love that.
You mentioned the thing with the truck. You can feel the impact of that truck falling into that ravine.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, hold on. I want to say this too. I forgot. The stuntman or the actor who's driving the truck, he gets thrown out of the truck and he hits the ground. That just makes my knees hurt every time I hit the pavement. He does that roll. Like, how did he make legs? Like, oh my gosh, that hurts so bad. Just watching it hurts.
Well, the thing that's great, and the thing I'm notorious on Twitter, I guess, for being an MCU nitpicker, but those movies are so plastic. I think when they have fights in those movies, there's no real impact. We know that Iron Man isn't going to get hurt when he's slammed through walls. We know that Captain America isn't going to get hurt. There's something that's missing from those movies, where the T-1000 and the T-800 are fighting at the end. And when the T-1000 is shoving that steel bar into the T-800's face and just crushing his face, you can feel that impact. When they're punching each other and slamming each other against walls, you can feel all of that. Do you agree with that? You can feel it in your gut when you watch it. But it's different from movies now. Like when you watch these MCU or these comic book movies, I don't feel any of that impact. I don't feel like there's any grounded kind of tone to it. It's all just plastic effects.
It's the way any of the risk factors are gone. There isn't anymore. So say no one's getting hurt, so you don't really feel anything.
Right. And then the last thing I want to say about the action, because again, a lot of people have talked about it. The thing that I love about the action in this, and the action in every movie that he's done, that Cameron has done after this, is it's not just one thing. You're looking at a fight in a hallway that spills into a department store, that becomes a chase on the street between a truck and a bike. and a motorbike, right? You look at the end, it's a fight scene where they're fighting off SWAT members inside a building, and they move outside to a SWAT truck, and then the T-1000 jumps in a helicopter, chases after the SWAT truck and the helicopter. It changes to that when the SWAT truck and the helicopter crash, to a semi chasing after a pickup truck. That moves into a steel mill. And again, it's weird because we're looking at, just as an aside, it's the same movie as the first Terminator, right? You have the first Terminator, you don't know what's going on. And then you have a big action scene where you see the Terminator, what he's up to. And then it kind of backs off and you have another encounter maybe with the Terminator. And then it ends in a factory. It's just strange how they both get to the point where in the first Terminator, Kyle and Sarah are trying to escape the T-800 and they're cornered. And she's like, there's no way out. Go back, go back. And in this one, Sarah goes, it's too hot. Go back, go back. So they're practically telling you it's the same thing, right? But the fact that it goes from a pickup truck tanker chase to the inside of a steel mill to them fighting, and falling into some like molten lava, you know what I mean? There's it's never just one thing. It always moves from one thing and becomes bigger and bigger and bigger as far as action goes. The risks because we're buying into these characters. We know what they're up against and what their goals are. And the other thing too, the choreography is so clear. Where you look at the hospital scene where they're running into the elevator, everything is shot from the left of the screen to the right. So you have the heroes that are running to the elevator left to right. You have the T-1000 that's chasing after them, right? And so they're facing each other. When they go outside in the cop cars, it kind of switches, right? So now they're facing from the right to the left. So his choreography is very clear. You're never confused in a James Cameron movie. I think that even goes from this to True Lies to Titanic to Avatar. You're never confused where you are, or what the choreography is, or what the stakes are. And that, I don't know, man. It seems so simple. It's so simple to do. I know that the Mad Max Fury Road and the John Wick movies and the Mission Impossibles have come back to say this is what focus should be, like the stakes and stuff like that. But why don't more action movies do this? I think a lot of action movies fail because they're so weightless and they don't have this stuff. And when you watch a Michael Bay movie, I can't. My brain just doesn't, I get a headache and I'm like, I can't watch this. Like, especially if it's Transformers, I don't know where my eyes are supposed to focus. You know what I mean? So his action, I don't know. Like,
I agree with you. I wish more movies would do that and would go back to the old techniques, and less special effects and more practical and all that stuff. I think that makes for a better movie.
Right. And like I said, even my favorite MCU movies that don't have that. The Black Panther does the action scenes in it don't have much weight to it. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. Yeah. They're missing a lot.
Well, hey, I told earlier that I was going to talk about things I don't like about this movie, or some of my problems, my critiques. And my biggest problem is, and it has to do with the writing. And I feel like a lot of times the dialogue or the writing is just there to move the story forward. And there is no, there's no deeper, there's no, they're more developed in this one than they were in the first one. But as far as the dialogue and the things they say and why they say it and all that stuff, there is none of that. I don't feel like there's any of that. Even though I can say I do care more about these characters in this one than I did the first one. Yeah. I just wanted more from the dialogue, more because the scenes are just kind of stale. They're kind of just flat. They just move the story along to the next action sequence, which is fine. I mean, it's good for a blockbuster movie, and it, like you talked about, it does hit all those beats. It does its job. It's well done. It's really fun to watch. It looks great, but I just want more. I want everything from a movie. I want it to have well-developed characters, awesome dialogue that just supports that character, and then I want to have the awesome, action sequences and the thrills and everything. But when I get just, bits and pieces of that, I can still enjoy it, but I want everything to come together. And so I feel like the script was the weak part of this movie.
Yeah, and that definitely, it's serviceable, right? There's no, like we said, not everybody can be Tarantino. Like you listen to a Tarantino movie, you relish how they're talking to each other, right? Yeah. I'm blanking out his name, Wes Anderson, right? You relish the character interactions. You relish what they're saying and what they're not saying. And this is all functional. It's just serviceable dialogue to get you to the next thing. It's just like we talked about, right? Yeah. And that is not his main goal and his main gift is spectacle. Like when I told you that I watched it last night, I watched the extended cut, which has a half an hour of extra scenes. And aside from the one scene where they reset the T800 CPU so you can start learning, other than that, I thought the extra scenes were just, yeah, cut this. Why is this in here? Like it's not advancing the story at all. You have Kyle Reese that shows up for a little bit, but it rehashes what she's going to learn later on, right? It tells you that. There's a scene where, so they find out that Sarah's going to go kill Dyson, right? And it's John and it's the T800 in the truck and chasing after her, and they're talking about it. And she's like, and John says, "Don't you get it? You just can't go around killing people." And in the original cut, the T800 just looks at him, right? But in this one, it goes on, and John is like, "Listen, we're more human than that. We hurt, we feel pain. Like you've got to learn this stuff." And I was like, I don't need you to expound, James Cameron. Like you're not good at this. Like when you try to be poetic, it doesn't work. There is a scene with Miles Dyson, and have you seen the extended cut? First of all, the half an hour longer. There's a scene where you find out that Dyson has a daughter. Like it's not just the son, but there's a whole scene where his wife, Esapatha Murkison, I think is how you pronounce her name, but she's trying to get him to pay attention to the kids. She goes down and they have a whole conversation about, you're too involved in your work. The kids love you. I love you. Like, I feel like I'm going crazy because your whole life is this work. And like, he goes, well, it's like, I'm trying to create an airplane without a pilot and all this stuff. She's like, yeah, but this machine doesn't love you like we do. And he turns off his computer and he looks at his kids who are just there. He's like, Raging Waters. And it's like a whole movie in a 3-minute capsule. And I'm like, I didn't need this. Like, I get Dyson from the rest of the movie. So you can absolutely tell why they cut a lot of this stuff. And putting it back in doesn't make it better. It rehashes stuff. And I think that, like you talked about, it's serviceable dialogue. But when Cameron tries to have a point and tries to be poetic, it's like, that's not your gift, man. You know what I mean? We talked about the soap opera dialogue in Titanic. And again, it's the same thing. It's like, that's not your strength.
Yeah. My other problem with the movie is the time travel paradox that's there. Like,
right.
I have a hard time getting past this. I can forgive it because it's such a fun movie to watch and it looks so cool. But it's basically the grandfather paradox, which it's hard for me to explain. But I looked it up, and it's basically, if you go back in time and kill your grandfather, then that means your grandfather doesn't have your father, then you're not born. You can't create a time machine. You can't go in time. You can't go back in time to kill him. And so then it's just like this endless loop of how things it won't work. It's impossible. Terminator 1, he sends his dad back into the past to stop the Terminator from killing his mom, but then his dad ends up, impregnating his mom with him while he's there. So you're like, wait a minute, how were you even born to get to the future in the first place, to create the time machine and then to tell your dad to go back and impregnate your mom? Like, I just don't understand how it all worked. And so it's confusing to me. But
that's the same thing as the Back to the Future when we talked about that. It's like, how can Marty still exist in 85 when Doc takes him from 1985? How do we go and Marty's in the future? Like, he left. Like, so it's that kind of thing, like time travel. It's like, don't think about it too much. And I think that's the problem with the sequels. I think that this Terminator 2 is a miracle because it shouldn't work, right? You establish the timeline in the first one, how they send a T-800 back to kill Sarah Connor to kill the leader of the resistance, right? So the machines can win. But in this one, they wait 10 years and then send an updated Terminator. It's like, where's the logic in that?
Yeah, so here's the thing. John Connor's already experienced all that too. So he's already he's already lived his life. He's already met the Terminator. He's already gone through all that trauma. And then he goes and then sends him back again. So it's this endless loop of him sending the Terminator back to save himself. It's just weird. And
it becomes more and more frayed. Like the more you go back to it. Like I said, T2 is the miracle because Cameron is so strong as a filmmaker and so strong with the spectacle that even the mistakes, even like in the ravine chase where you see the bridges, like it either disappears or changes shape multiple times. Or later, because I always thought it was funny that you have these mind-bending, groundbreaking special effects for the T-1000, and yet they can't hide Schwarzenegger's tree trunk of an arm. Like, they can't blue screen it out. And you can see it behind his back during the last scene, to the point where it's ridiculous, because you can see that his arm is so big that they can't hide it, right? But all that stuff doesn't matter because the action works and the dramatics work and the dynamics of the characters work. But when you do the sequels, I think with Terminator 3 and Terminator Salvation and Terminator Genisys, right, or even the latest one, Terminator Dark Fate, which again is the same movie as this, just with different characters. Like this, the structure is exactly the same, just with different ideas. But every time you go back,
those new ones yet, so I wouldn't know. But
yeah, I don't know if you should bother. Like I've done the legwork for us. You don't have to, but it's basically every time you go back and you do more and more of these time bending things, it becomes more unfeasible, like it less feasible. You start asking questions, it starts falling apart, like, and so you start noticing all the repeat stuff. And I think the problem with the sequels too is not just that time travel stuff. It's like all the filmmakers from Jonathan Mostow to Mick G, of all people, to Alan Taylor, to Tim, I can't forget his name, I can't remember his name, the one that did Deadpool, Tim Miller, right? They're not as strong of filmmakers as James Cameron is. So they can't get us past all these little loopholes and these little mistakes and these little flubs and these little ideas that Cameron wouldn't let fly if he was in the director's chair. You know what I mean? I think it's Chi-Chu's The Miracle. They should have stopped after that. They had a great ending point to keep churning these things out, and just there's no magic to these sequels like there's magic to T2.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, it all comes down to Cameron, man. We talked about his negatives, like stuff that he's not great at, you know what I mean? And his movies that aren't quite up to snuff with T2 or Aliens or Titanic or things like that. But he's good at what he does. And there's a reason that his last 3 movies that he's made have become some of the, if not some, the greatest and most successful movies of all time. Right? That it has to be, because it's not a fluke.
They wanted Guns N' Roses to be on the soundtrack. And they had just come out with the album Use Your Illusion 1. Mm-hmm. And so the song You Could Be Mine is on the soundtrack. And I like this song. I've always liked it. But anyway, when you first see Connor and the friend, Cooksey, what's his?
Yeah, Danny Cooksey.
What's his name? Danny Cooksey, yeah. By the way, I always thought that was Jared Rushton from Big. I don't know, he looks just like him. So I always thought it was the same actor. But when you first see him in the garage and they're playing with the bike and everything, you hear You Could Be Mine playing on the boombox. And then when you see them, at the ATM money out and they drive away, you hear You Could Be Mine playing again. And you see him like kind of pass by the alleyway. You briefly hear it again. Like, well, how are they playing the song over and over and over? Because that's funny reasons. But anyway, it's the same song. And then you hear it again. Another time you hear it, I forget when, but I think it's overused. It's a good song for the soundtrack, and I think it does a good job of creating that, that rebellious teenager attitude, whatever. It has a feel, it creates that. And so I like it for that reason. But I think they just overuse it.
Yeah,
it's just funny how it's just like,
don't they listen to other music besides that one song?
What about the B-side? Where's the B-side for this statement?
Yeah, that's funny. It's interesting.
Is there anything that you noticed about it that kind of caught you off guard? Any flubs or anything?
Well, other than the ones we talked about that are ingrained. Like I don't, there's, you can see the camera lights reflected sometimes. It's stuff that you can see in every movie. I never think it's a deal breaker. I just think at the end where you can see Schwarzenegger's arm tucked into his shirt, I just think that's funny. Because they can't. The dichotomy is so weird because everything blows your mind and it's so groundbreaking, but then that stuff is so old fashioned and they can't hide it. I just think that's funny. But again, not a thing
that question. The other thing I question is, why do Terminators have genitalia? Because in the first Terminator, you see they come through naked, I guess, and Stan walks towards Paxton and those guys. You see, his thing, and then in the second one, when Robert Patrick is taking the cop's clothes, you briefly see it. That's why I always thought, why have to have that? Is there a reason why they had to have, anatomically correct genitalia? Is there are there female Terminators in the past that need to be impregnated? What's going on here?
Yeah, well, there is the what's her name, the actress, Kristana Loken. Like, you do see partial nudity in the third one, so she's got breasts, right? And so it is funny. They're not Ken dolls, they're not they have genitalia, they're very anatomically correct. Just something to do with passing as human.
Okay, I guess I can buy that. I mean, despite all the the tiny flubs and the maybe the weak screenplay, I do agree with you that I think James Cameron is a visionary director, and I think he put together a well-crafted movie. It's entertaining from start to finish. It has the awesome action sequences. It has the heart moment at the end and everything when he gets lowered into the lava pit. It's just a fun movie to watch. I enjoy it.
Yeah, and again, just to sum up, it's like I said, it's the perfect summer movie so far as, you know, I know you talked about like having, you want the whole picture, right? And I think Jaws is the whole picture. Star Wars is the whole picture. Die Hard is the whole picture, right? But when I think of summer movies, I don't really think of them as being like the masterpieces. I just think of them as being these movies that have an impact, that do break new ground or do have great storytelling techniques, and that you go in with this and you have a silly grin on your face for the whole 2 hours you're watching them. And yeah, they're not perfect, like, but I, with a summer blockbuster, I just want to be entertained by it. I want to see things and spectacle that I don't usually see other times of the year. Even though the dialogue may be weak or serviceable, like I still think that this is a movie that epitomizes that summer movie of just it being so impactful and just being, you know, pow for your eyes and your senses and like your heart and all that stuff. I think it's, in that way, I think it's a complete picture and a complete movie. It gives you everything you want, even though it doesn't quite get you there as much as like a more classic movie. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't, again, when I say the way that we are now on Twitter, the way that we are in the discourse these days is if I say anything negative about a movie, that means I hate it. And I hate that idea. That is not what I'm saying with this movie. This movie does have mistakes. It does have drawbacks. It does have things that you can critique. But at the end of the day, it's still a solid blockbuster movie that gives you what you want from spectacle. So I think it delivers on that.
Yeah, definitely. One final thing. I didn't notice this when I first saw it, but Danny Cooksey's character, Tim, he's wearing an LA Guns shirt under his little flannel. And LA Guns, was one of the, Tracy Guns was one of the founding members of Guns N' Roses. It was Tracy Guns and Axl Rose. And then Tracy Guns left and Slash joined Guns N' Roses, but Tracy Guns went and formed LA Guns. And so it's funny that Guns N' Roses has a song in the soundtrack, but the character is wearing an LA Guns shirt.
Yeah.
So I noticed that. Hey, gun.
And we can make a joke that the T-800 like sneaks into the mall because he hides his gun in a rose box.
Yeah, and he pulls his gun out of a box of roses. That's what awesome too. Pretty fun.
Yeah, so great. Nice little touch.
Well, that should do it for Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Darin, I think let's just come back and do maybe a quick top 3 Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. What do you think?
Okay, shouldn't be too hard. That sounds good. Okay, we'll be right back.
Mr. Cameron, people should know how you saved us all, how you raised the bar. How will they know what a hero you are?
James Cameron doesn't do what James Cameron does for James Cameron. James Cameron does what James Cameron does because James Cameron is James Cameron.
His name is James Cameron.
All right, welcome back. So, Darin, we talked about doing a top 3 Arnold Schwarzenegger list for our outro topic. But before we do that, was there anything we missed that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about? Or we get everything covered?
I think we mentioned that T2 is a great movie, right? We did talk about that.
Yeah.
Flaws and all. So yeah, I think we covered everything. Yeah.
All right. Well, so let's go with our list. I want to hear your list. 1, 2, 3. Just you go first. Give me all 3 of your Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, and then do mine.
Okay, so again, it's just from, I was going to do mine from the perspective of performances, Schwarzenegger-wise. I know we can talk about his best movie all the time, but since we talked about his limitations or his positives as an actor, I wanted to talk about that. So my 3 favorite Schwarzenegger performances. I know that people talk about, my first one I'll mention, people talk about, the Terminator being the one that broke him in and opened the doors, right? But I'm going to go ahead and choose Conan the Barbarian as one of my favorite performances. We're going in chronological order here. That was the movie, like, again, trying to find his personality, trying to find his way on the big screen, or how he was going to make it dent. I think doing the pulp novels, being able to play Conan, and the Robert E. Howard's character, stuff like that. I think he really nailed that masculinity, and like Conan, like being the muscular kind of warrior. I think he really nails that. I think that's the movie that made a dent even before Terminator. I think just because Terminator made more money and was more successful than Conan the Barbarian, I think that's why people count that one. But I just think that he's a perfect tool in the hands of John Milius who we've talked about before. I think it's just a very perfect representation of what those pulp novels are. A lot of people don't, they kind of think of Conan the Barbarian as it's like a silly movie, but I think it nails everything it needs to nail, and Schwarzenegger is a big part of that. And then if we're going to jump ahead, we'll jump ahead by 8 years. I've always said this. I think Kindergarten Cop might be his best performance. And I just think it's because, sure, it's the joke. Like, he starts off as the musclehead, right? He starts off as the, he's too big to be doing the, teaching these kids all this stuff. But I think there's something in the script and in Ivan Reitman's direction and Penelope Ann Miller, and like I said, all the kids interacting with them. I think something opens up. There is a scene where Schwarzenegger, the John Kimball, is reading the kids a story before nap time. And one of the kids questions him, I think the main kid, Dominic, questions him on like, well, read this book. And he pauses and he realizes that this is the book that John Kimball used to read to his kid before his wife got divorced and left. And the way that the kid is asking him questions and the way that Schwarzenegger, you can see it. It's not just here's Schwarzenegger performing his lines. If you look in his eyes, I can feel that he's going through that. He's picturing what John Kimball's life is like. He's in that character about how the pain that he felt being torn away from his kid. And I just think it sells it, like, more than almost any other movie that he's done. I think he's got the goods in that movie. And then if you skip ahead again, let's see, 1990 for Kindergarten Cop. We skip ahead 25 years. I'm going to pick Maggie, the Henry Hobson directed movie. Again, it's a zombie movie. His daughter, Abigail Breslin, gets bit and slowly turning into a zombie. And it's about Schwarzenegger, his character. What's the character's name? Wade. He's dealing with the effects of his daughter, this love of his life that's turning into this monster, and how he's navigating that. And again, he's not known for these dramatic roles. It's a horror movie, but it's more of a drama. And I do think when Schwarzenegger like kind of sets aside all his like, his fronts and his, the shield or whatever that he has on, or the muscle kind of bound persona, when he settles down and he's quiet and he's pensive, I really think that he sells it. And yeah, like, he's limited in a lot of stuff. I don't know if you've seen Maggie, Johnny, but like,
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's very good. Like, you wouldn't expect him to have that kind of performance. And it the Breslin character obviously works, the script works, the direction works, so it all kind of ties in. But yeah, those are my 3 favorite Schwarzenegger performances: Conan the Barbarian from 1982, Kindergarten Cop from 1990, and Maggie from 2015. What about you?
Well, I kind of went with what I thought was his most iconic roles. I didn't want to pick Conan because I thought you would, and you did. And I didn't want to pick Commando because I'm not really fond of that one for some reason. But I think number 1 is T2. I think it's the most iconic role he's ever played. Terminator is his most iconic role. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And it's a good movie. And but Running Man, I love that movie. It's always been one of my favorites that he's been in. It's just a fun exercise and, like, escapism, all that stuff. It's just really fun and it's really entertaining to watch. And then of course, who's the guy who plays the announcer,
Richard Dawson.
Richard Dawson, right? Yeah. Family Feud and Hogan's Heroes, all that stuff. So it was fun to watch him play that part too. So Running Man's number 2. My number 3 is Predator. Yeah, the original.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
the best one, right? Yeah. So it's funny that you said that. I can't argue with any of those choices. Like, those are his most iconic runs. I think, just briefly, my opinions on it, like, if the Terminator is his role, like his iconic role, the thing that's always solid, no matter what happens in the Terminator movies or what we think, I think Schwarzenegger is the most dependable and solid thing about those movies. And that's a testament to him knowing that character inside and out and how to play it, and knowing that that's his iconic role, right? I think with Running Man, I actually like Running Man better than Commando 2. I know they're kind of both the same movie. They're silly and they're one-liners and stuff like that, and they're not meant to be taken seriously, but just a lot of the lines, the Stephen E. D'Souza script and that. Actually, I think he wrote both, but I just think he kind of hits it more. He hits that funny bone, or tickles that funny bone a lot more in that movie. And then, like you said, Predator is not just a good performance, but I think Predator might actually be his best movie, because he does have that iconic role, but it's a movie about masculinity and how these like rough, tough guys are no match for this alien, and they kind of all just fall to it. And Schwarzenegger has to lay all his weapons down in order to fight this guy at a primitive level. And I think Predator works on another level that the Running Man doesn't work on. if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, there's a
Yeah, yeah.
Or even Terminator 2, it doesn't really have that kind of level. Predator has that secondary level where it's a dumb action movie on the surface, but something smarter underneath. So, like I said, Schwarzenegger is able to pick and choose these roles, especially during that 80s and 90s run, that suited his persona. And I think it's better than trying to do something you're incapable of. It's like picking these movies that you can build around yourself. And I think Schwarzenegger might have been better at that than Stallone or even Bruce Willis during around that time. I don't know. He's very iconic.
He was definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah,
Might not have been the best governor, but he was a good movie star.
That's right.
All right,
That's a whole different podcast.
What do we have next?
Okay, well, first of all, we've got a returning guest. We've got Brian Scuttle, who brought Rad to us.
Oh,
and this time he's actually brought a good movie to us. So we're going to have it back on. We're talking about, like, I think we mentioned like legal thrillers before, or Quentin Tarantino. And so we definitely want to talk about John Grisham, because that was definitely a series of movies or adaptations that people went to see. And the movie that he's chosen is The Rainmaker, which again is interesting because Francis Ford Coppola, I think Megalopolis, or I think that's the name of the movie he's making, but it's running into a lot of trouble. And so it's going to be interesting looking back at Francis Ford Coppola trying to do this, like, crowd pleasing Hollywood blockbuster. So yeah, let's talk about The Rainmaker with special guest Brian Scuttle. But yeah, that's next time.
All right, that sounds good. Okay, so then for NostalgiaCast, I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lumberg. And until then, it's hasta la vista, baby.
I was going to say, we'll be back, but that's better.
Right.